so now we've had our gap, so we should go straight on to Charles Burnett, who I see there waiting for us. Charles, well, you all know, and is a professor at the Warburg Institute in London, and he's going to talk on the theory of elements at the interface of Arabic and Latin in the 12th century. So over to you, Charles.
Well, thank you very much. I'm bowled over by those first two presentations, and I can say that my own presentation will certainly not be reach the philosophical depths that the first two lectures have reached. So I hope also that you will forgive me for simply giving you a lecture without any handout and without any PowerPoint. And I hope that my narrative will be clear enough and understandable enough for you just to listen to my voice and see my face. I'm talking about two case studies in the transmission of theories of the elements and matter from Arabic into Latin. The first from a medical context, the second from an astrological context. And I will end with the development of the latter by a highly original Latin scholar. I think you can all guess who that will be, Herman of Corinthia. I am trying to dispense with handouts and PowerPoints and just concentrate on my words. The first context is southern Italy and Sicily, Magna Graecia, in the late 11th and early 12th century. In this period, we can see two related bodies of Latin literature deriving from both Greek and Latin. First, works associated with the school of Salerno, which had the reputation for being the most advanced centre for medicine in the period. The story is that a certain Constantine passed by the school on his way from the Islamic province of Ifriqiya and was so disappointed by the lack of theoretical knowledge among the doctors there that he went back to North Africa and fetched a large number of Arabic manuscripts, brought them to Salerno and thence to the Benedictine monastery of Monte Cassino, and proceeded to translate them into Latin. At approximately the same time, we see appearing in Magna Graecia a considerable number of texts on natural science and cosmology, translated from Greek, both Greek and Latin. The result is that we have a medicine rich in theory, alongside the study of the superlunary and sublunary world that could be experienced and explored. One of the overlaps between this new medicine and natural science is in the discussion of the elements. The comprehensive medical textbook, the Royal Book or Complete Book of the Art of Medicine of Ali ibn al-Abbas al-Majusi, which was the main source of Constantine's Pantegni, consists of 10 books of theory and 10 books of practice. It begins its theoretical discussion with a chapter on the elements. I shall look at this chapter, pointing out the differences between the Arabic and the Latin of Constantine the African. I should add that in 1127, in Antioch, a very literal translation was made of the same text by Stephen of Antioch, but enjoyed a very limited diffusion in contrast to Constantine's very popular work. The account begins with a definition. The philosophers mean by element istakis in Arabic, which is a transliteration of the Greek stoicheion, and they mean the simplest and smallest part of a composite body. And Ali ibn al-Abbas specifies that simple means one, first of one substance and second similar in its parts, and immediately gives as examples fire, air, water, and earth, but differentiates these substances from what may appear to the senses to be simple, such as stones and metals, which only the intellect realizes are composed of all together fire, water, air, water, and earth, all four elements. He goes on to say, all bodies subject to generation and corruption are called the truly first elements, the prima elementa in Latin, but others that are similar to them are called second and third elements. In the next section, the Arabic is much more detailed than the Latin. Ali ibn al-Abbas, following Galen's division into koinos, common, idios, particular, and poseches, approximate, in his De Elementis, on the elements according to Hippocrates, describes these elements, those elements that are close and proper, that are distant and general, and others intermediate between closeness and distance. The close elements in a sanguineous animal are its homoimerous parts, one might add, define them as bone, blood, flesh, etc., which come under the category of those things which are simple to the sight but compound to the intellect. For they are composed of four humours, which are described as being intermediate between closeness and distance. The distant elements share in the composition of all bodies, in the world of generation and corruption under the sphere of the moon, and are fire, air, water, and earth. Constantine substitutes logical vocabulary, calling these three different kinds of elements universals, particulars, and media, and states that it is only the universal and first elements that are the subject of this chapter. In the next section, Ali ibn al-Abbas introduces the term rukn as being the native Arabic equivalent to istakizat, the transliteration of the Greek. This is the only occasion on which he uses this word, but at least we know that he makes an analogy between the rukn, native Arabic rukn, and the Greek word. The elements are both mixing and changing into the nature of the body being generated, whether it's animate or inanimate. All sensible things under the sphere of the moon are in fact complex in their parts. In animals, bones only seem to be like earth, the humours like water, breath like air, and the heat we detect in bodies like fire. A plant needs all four elements to grow, and since animals subsist on plants, they receive the four elements too. Even metals are generated from at least water, air, earth, and fire, and the fire of the sun. But Constantine adds, although to layman, and this does not seem to be the case. Etsi idiotis non videatur. The passing away or death of things also proves that they are made of all four elements. An animal's natural heat rises into the fiery element. The spirits and breath in it returns to air. The moistures become vapours, and bones, muscles, and the like return to the nature of the earth. The elements themselves are not corrupted, and their existence, mawjud in Arabic, does not change. Constantine summarizes, elements return to their beginnings part by part. Then the erroneous opinions of other philosophers are summarized, that all bodies are made from one element, from atoms, or from only fire, only air, only water, or only earth. Hippocrates on the nature of man is quoted to show that nothing can come into being only from one thing. The Arabic adds from Hippocrates that experience of pain is one proof of this, since pain can only be inflicted by something which is different from the nature of that which is afflicted. Constantine omits this indication. Only in the next passage are qualities mentioned. What is stripped of every quality, we read, except its own, is truly the element. But the qualities are not themselves elements, but only qualities of elements. So when the philosophers have said that the elements of everything that is in this world are hot, cold, moist, and dry, they do not mean by this the qualities themselves, but the substances in which these qualities are at an extreme point. The substance which is hot in the extreme is fire, that which is cold, water, moist, air, and dry, earth. Each of these obtains from what is next to it the quality that is not in its nature. Constantine writes, in their mixture they exchange qualities between themselves. This agrees with a passage in Galen's on the elements according to Hippocrates. Thus, in a rising scale, earth obtains its coldness from adjacent moisture, water its moisture from the closeness of air its heat from the closeness of fire, and finally fire, while naturally hot, obtains its dryness from the continuous movement of the lunar circle. Ali ibn al-Abbas adds, the power of fire is hot and dry, the power of air is hot and moist. He is consistent in distinguishing one quality being in the nature of the element, the other being acquired from the neighbouring element. Constantine, by missing out in its nature earlier on, rather misleadingly says that fire is naturally hot and dry. He doesn't distinguish between the natural and the acquired quality. The relative movements of the elements are determined by their lightness and heaviness. Ali specifies that it is the substance of the element that is heavy or light, whereas Constantine just describes the element as being heavy or light. So he avoids describing an element as a substance. We are left unsure of exactly what degree of substantiality elements have, since if they're only intellectual, for example. More difficult is the question of how the simple elements generate bodies. A distinction has to be made between a mixture in which each mixed part remains unchanged, as like the mixture of water and wine, and a mixture which results when the quality of any one of the mixture is not truly found in the product, such as when bread changes into blood in digestion and seeds into plants in vegetation. This change is affected by the differing quantities of the qualities. Note here we're using qualities. Now, this difference of quantities accounts for the differentiation of genera into species and species into individuals. But the differences of quantities must be well balanced, and the mixing must be between things that agree in genus and power. Both these quotations come from Hippocrates on the nature of man. We can see that Ali ibn al-Abbas is indebted to the tradition of theoretical medicine, Hippocrates on the nature of man, Galen's commentary on this text, and Galen's on the elements according to Hippocrates, all works well known in Arabic. It is interesting to note, however, that the starting point here in this chapter on the elements is the element, i.e. fire, air, earth and water, and the discussion is only gradually brought around to the qualities, which, as we saw from Peter Singer's talk in the first session, are more prominent in the Galenic tradition. In the Arabic, the qualities are described as powers of the elements. The power of fire is hot and dry. This presumably reflects Galen's use, ultimately, of dunamis for the power of each quality. Constantine misses out this term, probably finding it difficult to understand. The other problem is what exactly is an element if it can only be discerned by the intellect. Ali refers to the nature, existence, and substance of the element. All of these words significantly are omitted by Constantine. The situation of the transfer of knowledge from Arabic to Latin is different a generation later and in another area, the Iberian Peninsula. The second quarter of the 12th century is conspicuous for the large number of texts translated in various parts of the peninsula, where there was contact between Latin and Arabic using scholars. But the vast majority of these translations were of works on the science of the stars, from astronomical tables through the various branches of astrology to astral magic. The most conspicuous, most substantial indeed, of these is the vast Introduction to Astrology, often called the Great Introduction to Astrology of Abu Ma'shar, the 9th century astrologer in Baghdad, which was translated twice, once by John of Seville from Limia in present-day Portugal in 1133, and a second time by Herman of Carinthia in 1140 in northeast Spain. Like the medical writers translated in the late 11th century, Abu Masha adds theory to the practice of astrology, as the medical writers added theory to the practice of medicine. And within this theory fall the elements, under the general rubric that all things under the sphere of the moon are subject to generation and corruption, and that it is the movement of the planets that are the immediate cause for their change and movements. Abu Ma'shar gives two different accounts of the elements, which differ in terms of terminology. The second part of 8 parts of his work is devoted to the reasons for the zodiacal signs being as they are. Abu Mashar starts with the basic fact that everything that is generated and corrupted is made from fire, earth, air, and water, which he calls here the 4 compound elements, Arba'a Arkan Murakkaba. Later, he gives several reasons for adopting this order of elements, which the signs of the zodiac follow. That is, fire, earth, air, and water. It becomes clear that the compound elements are so called because they each combine 2 qualities which are simple. Moreover, I quote, each of the 4 elements, though compound, is related to the simple element that is most dominant over it. Fire to heat, earth to dryness, air to wetness, water to coldness. The term for element here, rakan, which Ali ibn al-Abbas used only once, comes from the root meaning to support or to lean on, as we've seen, and is otherwise commonly used for support and in geometry for an angle. Thus, both the 4 elements and the 4 qualities, a word which Abu Masha doesn't use in this context, can be regarded as the 4 corners of a rectangle on which all existing beings are based. The simple elements are described by abstract nouns, heat, coldness, dryness, and wetness, rather than adjectives, just as the compound elements are fire, earth, air, and water. The geometrical conception continues in that the 4 elements are complemented by 3 conditions, halat, which are described in terms of a line, having a beginning, middle, and end, corresponding to the beginning, middle period, and end of life. It is this combination of 4 corners or angles and a line of determinate length that accounts for the existence of every individual that comes to be and passes away. Since all coming into being and passing away is subject to the heavens, then it makes perfect sense the signs of the zodiac too are divided amongst the 4 angles taken 3 times, beginning, middle, and end, which preserve the geometrical arrangement. A circular band of 12 signs connected to each other by 4 triangles called triplicities within the circle. The terms simple and compound element are taken over in the literal translation of John of Seville, elementum simplicia and elementa simplicia and elementa composita, who sometimes substitutes angulus for elementum, the first meaning of rakan. He does not use the term quality at all. Hermann of Carinthia, however, who is much more aware of the classical and contemporary Latin tradition, does not use the term compound element for fire, air, earth, and water, and adds to the description of the simple element something which is not in the Arabic. Heat, cold, dryness, moisture are not themselves bodies, but are the origin of the binding together of the substance, substantiadis compago, of all bodies, including those which are popularly, vulgo, called earth, water, air, and fire. In other words, he brings Abu Mashar's division into line with the division in the medical works between the seeming elements that we see and the pure elements that underlie them, only discernible by the intellect. Hermann does, however, preserve a geometrical image of the course of an individual's existence in translating the three conditions of beginning, middle, and end as the three interstitia, the intervals. As I say, Abu Mashar does not use quality for the simple elements, but he does refer to their strengths or power, kuwa, fire, over which the power of heat is most dominant. Don of Seville translates this as fortitudo, Hermann as virtus. This too could be a reminiscence of qualities as dynamis in Galen. Having distinguished between the compound and the simple elements and assigned one compound element to each sign of the zodiac, Abu Mashar, like Galen, talks mainly in terms of the simple elements, which are respectively active, heat and coldness, and passive, dryness and wetness. And the indications of each of the signs are in terms of heat, coldness, etc., which are described as conditions. John, as usual, translates the word hal, condition, as esse, just the verb to be. Hermann omits condition altogether, but keeps the abstract nouns calidum, siccum, frigidum, and humidum. Occasionally, in his discussion of the elements and the zodiacal signs, Abu Mashar calls these elements not arkan, the plural of rakan, but, or meaning angles, but taba'i, which literally means natures. The context is the division of the elements into light and high, and thick and low, and the title, On the Arrangement of the Natures of the Signs, of one of the chapters. This term nature for element occurs throughout the great introduction, but perhaps has a different source from the rakan. It may be significant that the chapter headed on the arrangement of the natures of the signs begins with an objection to Abu Mashar's argument made by the investigations of natural sciences. And you see the same word appear in a different form, man nazara fi al-ulum al-tabi'iyya, the natural sciences. Abu Mashar revels in the permutations of the root taba'a, whose basic meaning is to imprint or to stamp. On two occasions, he identifies the taba'i as the four elements. The first occasion is in his description of astrology at the very beginning of his work, which includes the phrases, the knowledge of the nature, tabi'a, of every planet and what arises as a result of their natural imprint, taba, on this world, which is under the sphere of the moon, in respect to the alteration of the natures, taba'i, i.e. fire, air, water and earth, and their imprint on the individual animals, plants and minerals which arise from these natures, the taba'i again. If one had to keep the same root in the English translation, one would have to refer to the impression, the imprints and the impressions, and what results from the impressions, etc. One can immediately see that the singular tabi'a, followed by a genitive, qualifies what follows, the nature of such and such, whereas the unqualified plural taba'i is equivalent to the four elements. Playing with the root taba'a, which is only really possible in Arabic, leads Abu Mashar to refer repeatedly to the natures, the taba'i, i.e. the elements, and the natured, the matbu, the things which arise from the elements, alongside the verbal form taba'a, to imprint, and in taba'a, to be imprinted. Here the natures are always the elements and not the elemental qualities. They form a quartet with form, composition, and the natured. Thus we read, we call man, horse, ass, etc. forms. We call the four natures, fire, air, water, and earth. We call a natural composition the combination of the parts of natural individuals and the composition of each individual as a unit. And we call the natured all the individual animals, plants, and minerals that are produced from their four natures. Thus, he continues, in natured things, i.e. the natural individual things that are sensed and seen, four things are found, The first of them is existence, of the essence of the natured thing. The second, the composition. The third, the four natures. And the fourth, the species it belongs to. End of quote. The upshot of the argument is that there has to be an external cause to bring together the form or species and the four natures. As for the ontological status of the natures, this is less clear. At one point, Abu Mashar writes that we judge the natures by what is natured. Individuals of the species of animals, plants, and metals are in the natures, potentially, before they are natured. Then they become natured. The combination of the four natures in individuals of a species is brought about through the powers of the movements of the planets. A procession which he summarizes as a cause natures the natured from the natures. I'm sorry, this is really getting ridiculous, but this repetition is reflected in John of Seville's translation, causa elementans elementatum ex elementis. This seems to imply each actual individual will always be a combination of the four natures, as the Medici had also said, and before they are combined in different ways, they have no substantiality. We read again, forms are what direct the natures and shape the natures into their substantiality. So the substantiality comes later, Jauhariya. But I'm not sure how this is compatible with the idea that the natures are receptacles of the potential individuals. Abu Mashar uses yet another image, that the natures are like tools, adawat or instrumenta, for the forms to use as craftsmen. For example, in the case of man, forms are hot and wet natures as tools for the reception of the animal and rational soul, and as appropriate for lying down, standing up, and reclining. It is noticeable, however, that these natures are the elements, not the qualities, and it is at the level of the elements that their three properties are judged. One, being contrary to each other. Fire is contrary to water, since heat and dryness is contrary to cold and wet. Two, changeability into each other through rarefaction and condensation. And three, increase and decrease in their heat, coldness, dryness, and moisture. John of Seville, of course, translates all this literally, but at one stage he switches from using the terms naturae and naturalia for Tibai and Matbu to elementa and elementata, as if only in the course of his translation did he realize that these natures were indeed equivalents to elements. A lot of ink has been spilt over this word elementatus as probably being an invention of John of Seville. Hermann, on the other hand, retains the four natures. He doesn't use the word elementum at all, but interprets them as materia, which he therefore substitutes for naturae on most occasions, and which is the natural adjunct to form. So form uses matter as a tool. Individuals exist potentially in matter. I mean, this all sounds very familiar. In a way, this takes away the ambiguities of the meaning of natures. Are they things in which things inhere potentially? Are they things which become substantial and so on? So we have seen that Hermann of Carinthia introduced several subtle changes of sense into his translation of Abu Mashar's great introduction. 3 years after finishing this translation, he wrote an original work on the cosmos and on man, which he called On the Essences, De Essenties. In describing a cosmos in which a provident God ensures the harmonious ordering of the upper and lower universe through the medium of the planets, Hermann takes much from Abu Mashar, or one might say from his Abu Mashar, which he has already tailored to his views. But he also takes a lot from Constantine's Mantegni and from the Latin sources in vogue at, as we still may say, the school of Chartres, and he indeed was a student of Thierry of Chartres. Fundamental to the activity of the universe, in Hermann, is the moving of form into matter, which he describes as the movement of composition. We recall that the form natures, i.e. matter, and composition were the first three of the four items in Abu Mashah's account of generation. Hermann describes matter first. There are reminiscences of the definition of the element in the Pantegni. The elements are the simplest and smallest part of a composite body and are universals, universalia. But the Medici, by which Hermann means Constantine in the Pantegni, are explicitly criticized for only considering sublunary elements and making fire, air, water, and earth elements, although they are clearly compound since they have more than one quality. Hermann prefers to take Abu Mashah's elementa simpla, i.e. the qualities, as the true elements. But he says these are names given to the first seeds of the matters of things, which have the capacity for producing body wherever they occur, pro singularum capacitate. Hermann describes what happens to these seeds in the form of a cosmogony. I quote, God first laid down seeds which had a generative power, which were individually of the nature of the same, but when brought together were of the nature of the different. Same and different of Plato's Timaeus recurs frequently in Hermann's De Essentiis. I continue. God divided the seeds by sex, and while reserving the same sex seeds for the higher parts of the universe in which no changes of coming into being and passing away were possible, he assigned those of different sexes to the sublunar region. The seeds of different sexes had the potential for mixing, and from them, of course, came more generation in the sublunar world. Hermann's most pressing question is whether these primordial seeds are body or not. We have seen that the corporeality of the simple elements was not resolved among the Medici or Astrologi. At what stage does body appear, and how does it appear, considering the axiom that no body can come from something incorporeal? The seeds cannot be bodies, not even small bodies, because bodies have places, whereas these seeds are universals found through the whole cosmos. Moreover, every body requires a matter from which it is made. Moreover, there's no pre-existing matter for the seeds. Rather, the aggregate of the seeds is itself matter. Hermann's conclusion is that at the stage when they mix together, the seeds become a kind of corpus incorporeum, incorporeal body, halfway between body and the incorporeal, a term he would have found in Chalcidius' commentary on Plato's Timaeus, not to mention scholars of the school of Chartres. When the mixture is ordered by the arrival of form, the body is complete. At this point, two manuscripts of his work, the De Essentiis, give an alternative passage to the original reading. This is probably the result of Hermann himself revising his text at a later date. It adds to the succession of stages, which I've outlined in the cosmogony, something more explicit concerning form and matter. The simple elements, the revision says, heat, cold, dryness, and moisture, are identified as the principal forms divorced from all matter. They approach corporeal substance to form the first bodies, i.e. the material elements, fire, air, water, and earth. The section on matter and the elements appropriately ends in the De Essentiis with a reminiscence of Abu Mashah. The material seeds are universal singles found through the whole composition. However many the authority of form, the formae auctoritas, has separated out for the necessity of the composite being. Abu Mashah had written, of course in Hermann's version, ita ergo omne compositum non materiae sed formae auctoritati principalitur ascribitur, Thus then, every composite thing is principally ascribed not to matter, but to the authority of form. This in turn is Hermann's take on the Arabic, which, translated literally, gives, thus the philosophers ascribe the activity to the forms, and they liken them to craftsmen and make the natures, or matter, like tools. Now, Hermann's description of matter and the elements is indeed much more complicated and rich, and I haven't done justice to this, but I hope I have shown that he is indebted to at least two traditions, or more than two traditions, but to the Medici of Constantine's Pantagruel, to Abu Masha, of course, which he translated himself, but also to contemporary, classical authors who were in vogue among what we call the scholars of the school of Chartres. I hope I've given a glimpse of what was happening at the interface of Arabic and Latin texts, the sparks arising from the rubbing against each other of the two philosophical traditions. I hope I haven't gone too far over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And